Hey, and welcome to the highlights of episode number 81 with Terri Cole. Some of my favorite parts of this episode were when she defines the difference between boundaries and preferences and why we need to have both. I also love when we talk about boundaries in our relationships, especially in a blended family situation like what I'm in, and how to assert your boundaries with love, ease, and grace. But there is so much more wisdom and inspiration that you get in the full episode. So, to listen to the full podcast and to get all the info in the show notes, head to melissaambrosini.com/81 right now. Terri, welcome. It's so great to have you here. How did you get to where you are today? How did you become this ambassador for self-love?
I grew up in a home where I felt incredibly valued by my mother. And so that had a lot to do with everything that I've done in my life. Feeling really unconditionally loved as a kid really, set the trajectory for my life. But I still struggled, as everyone does in their teens, in my 20s, and even into my 30s. So I've had a ton of therapy, and that made me know which direction I wanted to go in. And although I had different careers before I became a psychotherapist and a love expert, right? I knew that I wanted to go this way from the experiences that I had. So it isn't that I came from not having self-love necessarily. It's that I came into a situation where I realized how incredibly important self-love is to create any other good love in your life, whether it's sibling, friendship, romantic.
Absolutely. And in your amazing self-love revolution, how did you create that? And what was the intention behind that?
Well, it's really the real love revolution, because for me, so much of what people were looking for, what my clients were looking for, and I've been a psychotherapist in New York and LA and internationally for the past 20 years. My demographic is super high functioning women who are really successful and who could figure out any system, could negotiate any system, could solve any problem. And yet they didn't have satisfying romantic love in their lives. And as I dug deeper with these women, I realized what needed to happen for that to happen.
And what does that anger and bitterness and resentment do to us over time?
It surely does not help your relationships. It turns you into a martyr, which, right now people would think no, I'm not a martyr. But the truth is, if you are resentful of the things that you have voluntarily done for other people, if you feel like you're always sort of getting the short end of the stick in your relationship because you can't tolerate anyone else suffering or anyone else not having what they quote unquote need, and you're so efficient and effective that you know that you can do it for them or get it done, whatever it is, in the end, you do end up angry and bitter, and it makes people not want to be around you. And it's just a terrible place to be because people end up there unintentionally.
Why do we need to set these healthy boundaries, and how can we do this?
Let's start with some myths around boundary drawing. I find that in my practice and in the groups that I run, women have a tendency to think that drawing boundaries means you're being mean. It's being bitter, it's being angry, it's being selfish, it's not being loving. And the truth about boundaries is that it's the exact opposite of that. When you let someone know what your limits are or what your preference is even, you're doing them a service, right? You're giving them a chance to step up for you. Maybe they will and maybe they won't. But making them guess what those things are is really not loving. It's this illusion. We get very sucked into wanting to be perceived as being nice. And in fact, being nice has become this virtue, quote unquote, that is valued above almost all others. But it isn't really being nice. What ends up happening is that women end up with a disease to please, right? Where you prioritize everyone else's needs above your own, say yes when you really want to say no, apologize often when you're not sorry and when you're angry, and avoid a confrontation at all costs. Those are the 4 indications of having the disease to please. And what ends up happening is we want to think about ourselves, like our self-image. We want to be considered a nice person. But is it nice to say yes when you really want to say no. I'm going to give you a really simple phrase that you can use when you are drawing a boundary, which is just to say, I'd like to make a simple request.
So easy.
So easy. And the truth is, right? You know this, Melissa, like any request actually is simple. Perhaps the person fulfilling it, it may not be simple for them and they may not do it, but every request can be simple. And the less drama and charge that we have attached to drawing boundaries, the easier it is. And there's all this work that I do with people about embodying their own desires around what it is that they want. You have to know what your deal breakers are. But again, your deal breakers and the behavior that you do and don't allow in your life, what is okay and not okay with you, is something that you learned from modeled behavior. And even if your parents had like a very violent marriage, let's say, and you swore to God you were never going to have that in your life, if you don't have some kind of intervention that teaches you how to not repeat that, because as humans, this is our default position psychologically. Freud talked about, repetition compulsion, meaning that we are compelled to repeat traumatic and dramatic and other, I've discovered many other things as well. So your wish to not repeat something is not enough. You need to learn how to not repeat it. So again, so many of the women who were in my Boundary Boot class and in my Real Love Revolution courses, so many of them said, I didn't even know that I was allowed to say that that wasn't acceptable to me. Like, I didn't even know that that was on the table, that I could call that a deal breaker, because they had had that in their early life. And so they thought that, I guess pain and love, when they get intertwined at an early age, it takes intention and time and psychological skill to have them not be interwoven any longer. So it's the same thing with, love and violence, or love and verbal abuse, or love and someone, passively aggressively torturing you, or you passively aggressively torturing them. These are all things that they don't have to go together with healthy, vibrant, flexible love. And they usually don't go with healthy, vibrant, flexible, long-lasting love, because those things have a shelf life, usually. Let's talk about preferences. And so we can see there's a difference. And then you guys listening, then you fill the things in between. For me, I couldn't be with someone who was lazy. That's a deal breaker. I'm not interested in that person. I need someone who's motivated, inspired, curious, always learning. I needed someone who is successful in their own right, so that they have their own thing and I have my own thing. And then together, I'm happy to be in the front row of my husband's thing. Yippee. I love to cheer him on. But I couldn't have it. I'd been in relationships where I had my thing and that person thought that I was their thing. And that's just too much pressure and not interesting. But those are personal deal breakers, right? Where it was just, I wouldn't be in a relationship with someone, or I was and it didn't last. The smaller things, when we're talking about preferences, maybe you like to go to bed early. And what if your partner is a night owl and doesn't go to bed until 3 a.m? Those are things that can become really big deals in relationships. So is that a deal breaker? Listen, nothing's a deal breaker if you haven't drawn a boundary, had a conversation, and tried to work it out. Now, physical abuse, I haven't had this experience in my life. I don't know how that isn't a deal breaker. Like, I just feel like that's always a deal breaker. It really has to be. The addiction thing, maybe someone can get help. Maybe they can get into recovery. I've seen it happen. So again, it's personal. Preferences are, I would prefer that you not wait 4 hours to text me back unless there's a reason you can't. That's my preference for my husband. Like, it would be great. Even if you can't talk now, please let me know that. I am on a need to know basis, but that's my personality. Other people may be more mellow and it may be fine. So you see what I mean, Melissa? It's like very much about how you want to be treated in your life, the way that you treat the other person.
How can we assert our new boundaries, especially with those around us, without offending anyone or coming into contact with boundary bullies?
Well, you can't. So that can't be the goal, because there are boundary bullies everywhere. And you have to understand the process of change. So human relationships, no matter whether it's you and your sister or you and your lover, they're a dance. So when you decide that you're going to change the steps to the dance, that person is going to have feelings about it. They're going to do what one of my heroes, her name is Dr. Harriet Lerner. She wrote a whole bunch of books called The Dance of Deception, The Dance of Anger, The Dance of Intimacy. She's so wonderful and brilliant and has profoundly impacted my work. I love her. She's the one who came up with the dance analogy. And she talks about that when you do that, the other person will do what she names a change back move. So if you draw a boundary with your mother and she doesn't like it, then she may now ratchet it up, like become hysterical about something, or say that you don't love her because you're doing this, or say you're being disrespectful because you're doing this. But when you really learn how to be a boundary ninja, you know you're not being disrespectful. You know you're not being unloving. You know that drawing boundaries is indeed the most loving thing.
What else happens if we don't start to assert these healthy boundaries?
Well, you never truly honor your most authentic self. You never fully embody who you are, right? You never allow someone to know you authentically. And how can anyone authentically love you if you never allow them to authentically know you?
Can you talk to us now about the concept of hello, goodbye? I love this, and I would love for you to share it with the tribe.
Yes, the Hello Goodbye Speed course, which is something that I created and that is in the Boundary Bootcamp course. It is a way of not getting stuck in conversations that you don't want to have. What happens when we're afraid to allow the pregnant pause? Let's just say, just allow it. No reason to fill it. When we're afraid to allow it, we end up agreeing to stuff we don't want to do. We end up making plans with people we don't even like, you know? So the Hello Goodbye Speed course came out of so many of my clients and the women in my tribe just saying, I'm so exhausted because I let the cab driver talk to me for 20 minutes and like I didn't want to, or I had a terrible massage because the massage therapist was telling me their life story and I wanted to like shoot myself because I wanted to just not talk. So I have all of these different strategies that people can do. Let's just say you're in a restaurant and you're on the buffet line in a restaurant. And you see someone you know, you talk to them briefly there, and then immediately say, oh, my food's getting cold, I'm going to go sit, or whatever. That's one way of getting out of that. If you see someone in the supermarket, especially someone who you know is a yacker or a complainer, a real negative person that you just, or maybe you just don't feel like talking. I always say you get really clear with your physical body. You keep walking. When I'm around someone I don't want to talk to, I don't stop, even if they stop. And so I have clients say to people, which is, you know what? I'll get back to you within the next 2 days about that. I've instilled a rule. I'm making no on the spot decisions. So, or I want to confer with Vic and see what our schedule is like. But the real thing that is most important is that you stop the auto yes. That is the most important thing, because once you say yes, now you feel you're committed. You feel like you're angry, you know what I mean? Which you don't want to do. The more you know yourself, the more you understand why you are the way you are. And that's why, for me, and listen, I'm a psychotherapist, so of course a deep dive is my nature. It's what I'm interested in doing with people. And you don't always have to do a deep dive. But if you struggle with the auto yes, you struggle with that for a reason. So for me, it's like when I could more deeply understand what was motivating my behavior, it made it so much easier to change my behavior.
Can you tell us about how we assert these boundaries when it comes to blended families? Because it's quite common now, and this is something that I'm personally really interested in.
All right, because this is something that it can be very, very difficult. Because, if you go into a family system that already exists and you are like the person coming in and either there's a divorce or someone has died, you have to figure out, how can I assert myself without trampling over other people and not being sensitive to what is already happening with them? I think that the situation matters. So my husband was widowed. So his young wife died when he had a 5, a 3, and a 9-month-old, sadly. And so I came in, but not for another 12 years. So they had been alone, 4 men in a house. And so I knew that the way that I would go in my mind, I had it set that all I wanted to do was to be a loving other in the boy's life. Oh, it's 3 boys. I wanted to be a loving person in their life. They didn't need to regard me in any particular way. I wasn't on any trip of like, well, now I'm your it was none of that stuff. I was like, I'm only 15 years older than my oldest son, my stepson. And so I observed first. I saw, where does help need to happen? Because they were like, there was a lot of conflict within the family system, got everyone into family therapy. That was very helpful. But boundaries are really important in blended families where you have an agreed upon set of rules, of house rules, we call them.